Yeah, thank you. And hello to all of you. I appreciate being invited to be here. As Mia just said, I'm the Education and Engagement Manager here at Seed Savers Exchange. And I am going to introduce you to Seed Savers and tell you a little bit about the organization's history, what we're doing now and why, and invite you all to enjoy to join us in a worldwide seed saving community. Let me just share my screen here. And I'll get started. Let me know if you don't see that. It looks like it's working. Um, so I bet, since you're all master gardeners, I bet that if I asked, who among you is a gardener, probably every one of you could raise your hand. But what if I asked how many of you are seed savers? I think it's very common today for people to garden without necessarily thinking about saving seeds. So I'm here today in part to invite you all to start thinking about that and remind us all that seed saving is a natural and important part of gardening, and one that until very recently was a very common aspect of gardening and really can be once again. So again, I'm here to welcome you back to seed saving. So first of all, who are we? What is Seed Savers Exchange? Our mission here is to save and care for seeds, to share seeds and educational resources, and to cultivate a seed community. As an organization, we will turn 50 next year, but the story of Seed Savers Exchange actually starts with our co-founder, Diane Ott Whaley, when she was a little girl. She used to visit her grandfather, who lived in Festina, Iowa. And she had a favorite little spot in the corner of his porch that was covered with these beautiful morning glory vines. And she would hang out there. And every fall, when it was time to go back to school, she would go help him collect these little seed pods. And they'd have these seeds to share, to plant the next year if they wanted to plant them in a new spot or share with admirers or friends and family. And this was just a normal part of her life. She didn't think a lot about it until she grew up and she decided she was going to get married. She was going to move away. And she thought, gosh, it would be really nice to have these seeds with me in my new home. And so she asked her grandfather for some of these morning glory seeds. And he went and got a little pillbox full of morning glory seeds. And he also handed her a handful of German pink tomato seeds, which was a kind of tomato seeds or a kind of tomatoes that her grandmother grew in the garden and used in the kitchen. And as he gave these seeds to Diane, he told her that these seeds had actually been brought over with his parents when they immigrated from Bavaria in the 1880s, and that the family had been growing these seeds and saving them year after year for generations. Now, Diane knew that her grandparents growing up in the Depression era had saved seeds, but she just thought of it as a money-saving endeavor and didn't know until this moment this important connection that her family had to these seeds throughout generations. And when she learned this, she felt really close to these seeds and close to the generations of family who had saved these particular seeds. She started wondering maybe she had cousins she'd never even met who live in Europe growing these same German pink tomato seeds or these same morning glory seeds. And they became just even that more special to her at that time. Sadly, shortly after this gift was given, her grandfather actually became ill and passed away. And it was at that moment that she suddenly felt a heavy responsibility for these seeds. And she started to worry, what if I'm actually the only one who's saving this particular kind of tomato and this particular morning glory? And what if something happens to me or happens to my garden? And these seeds that have been so important to my family for so long could vanish and become extinct. So she talked to her husband at the time, and they thought a lot about this, and they decided, we're probably not the only ones thinking about this or the only ones in this position. One of the reasons that we have such a rich garden heritage here in the US is because there are people who have come from all over the world and brought seeds with them. And so she wrote a letter and sent it out to Back to the Land magazines that she thought that different gardeners might read. And like Mother Earth News, for example, is shown here, Landward Ho, a few others. And it was basically an all call to gardeners with the idea that if I have seeds that are really important to me and I share them with you, and then I also share them with this person over here, even if something happens to me or to my garden, those seeds won't be lost because you have some of them as well. And so does this person. And maybe there's something that's important to you that I could also grow, and you could also have other gardeners grow. And that would help those seeds and help ensure their survival into the future. That first year, they heard back from 29 gardeners. Each gardener typed up a little list of the seeds they had to share, along with descriptions, and they sent her a quarter. And she typed it up into a 6-page publication, stapled it in the corner, and sent it out as a little newsletter. Each of these little blurbs included contact information, so people could contact one another and request seeds from each other. And that was the very first seed exchange that Diane and Kent set up. I heard that they were not all that excited about the number 29. They thought more people should be interested in this. But that was in 1975. The very next year in 1976, that number grew to 142, and it continued to grow from there. In fact, it has grown and grown. We still publish this every year. Here's a picture. I actually just got this today. I don't know if you can see it, but it's like an inch thick, a publication now that includes hundreds of gardeners listing seeds, and thousands of different seed varieties that you can get in the exchange. So this is a nice success story of sharing seeds from person to person. As this exchange grew, more and more gardeners started to know Kent and Diane as people who took really good care of seeds. And often these gardeners were getting older and maybe didn't have anyone in their own family to pass seeds along to. And so because Kent and Diane started to be known as people who took good care of seeds, people would start donating their seeds to them. So this seed collection that started off with the German pink tomato and what we now call Grandpa Ott's morning glory started to grow. Here's an example. This is a picture of, I think, a squash seed that someone sent with a little description, just kind of taped up in a piece of paper and sent their way. So that collection started to grow. It started to take over their kitchen counter, started to take over their kitchen cupboards. It started to grow and go into their basement. And one year, a man named John Withy, who had been collecting beans, he knew, or he remembered a bean from his childhood that he was in search of, and he sought this Jacob's cattle bean, looked far and wide, and ended up amassing a collection of about 1,200 varieties of beans in the search. He did find it, and he did create quite a collection of beans. He decided to donate that entire collection to Kent and Diane. And it was at that moment that Kent and Diane thought, okay, this is a really big project. It's really important to a lot of people, and this could be our life's work. As you all know, a seed collection is not like a stamp collection or a model car collection or a postcard collection. You can't just keep it in the closet forever. Seeds are living things that need to be grown out. And if they are stored in long-term storage, it needs to be really good storage conditions. So they started looking for a place to do this, and eventually they came here. We're near Decorah, Iowa, in northeast Iowa, and our home base here is called Heritage Farm. And the organization continued to grow. That seed collection also continued to grow. We now have over 20,000 varieties of seeds in this walk-in freezer that we keep at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. We also have potato tissue collection. We have a garlic collection. We have 2 orchards with nearly 1,000 different varieties of apples. And a beautiful 890-acre farm where we grow things out and preserve the area. We're a great place to visit. We have over 8 miles of hiking trails and lots of people working here. We have a seed catalog, a visitor center, and a lot going on, which might lead to the question, if we have all of this available, why would you need to save seeds? It's a good question. Why would it be important for you to save seeds? I've been told that there are as many reasons to save seeds as there are people who do so. And there are a number that might resonate with you that I'm going to share with you right now. So one reason, like in Diane's story, is to connect to a family heritage. This slide highlights another story of family heritage. This is the Osilio family. They donated an amazing pepper to Seed Savers Exchange a few years ago, and this pepper had been in their family since the 1920s. It's one of my favorite peppers. If you're lucky enough to be in a family or a community that has passed seed on from generation to generation, keep that going if you can. And if you can't keep going yourself, find someone who can. And as you get further into seed saving, if you find yourself in a position to be that someone who can take on another person's seed legacy, that's a huge gift and a huge reason to keep saving seeds. Of course, not everyone has a family story of seed saving, but more and more people are connecting to their cultural heritage through seeds. This fish pepper is an example of a food that has been popular in a specific region of the world, in this case, the Mid-Atlantic, where it has been used to flavor fish stews and soups. Finding foods and seeds that connect you to a culture you're a part of can be a really powerful reason to save seeds. And more people are learning about themselves and their own cultural heritage and making that connection through food and through seeds. I'm going to take a moment to talk about a couple of specific projects that focus on reconnecting to family and cultural heritage. First of all, I think that any discussion of seeds and their histories is also a discussion of humans and our histories. And if you know your US history, you probably know that this country's history includes intentional atrocities committed against Indigenous communities by the US government. One of these atrocities included systematically removing Indigenous people from their food systems, burning down cornfields and removing people from their land, and forcing Indigenous people to assimilate into American culture. There are stories of kidnapping children and bringing them to boarding schools where they were forced to cut their hair, their language was forbidden, and they were fed food based on white flour, sugar, and dairy. They were intentionally removed from their food systems as a means of control. So there have been generations of Indigenous people disconnected from seeds who were originally part of their family and community. The Indigenous Seed Keepers Network, or ISKN, is working to bring Indigenous communities back in touch with the seeds that they lost, and communities are able to reconnect to a cultural heritage that was stolen from them. The photo on the left of this slide is courtesy of Rowan White, who is an Indigenous seed keeper, an activist, and the former chair of Seed Savers Exchange Board. This photo is of a moment when these squash seeds that had been in Seed Savers Exchange's care were returned to the Taos Pueblo tribe after years of forced separation. Reconnecting to lost and stolen seed ancestors is a powerful reason to save and keep seed. On the right is a photo from the Collard Project. The Collard Project is a project all about celebrating collard seeds and seed-saving traditions. This project's aim is to build a coalition of seed stewards, gardeners, farmers, chefs, and seed companies working to preserve heirloom collard varieties and their culinary heritage. The story of collards is part of the story of enslavement and atrocities against enslaved people. Enslaved people had a long history of forced contributions to the American food system while simultaneously being systematically removed from their own food cultures. Collards themselves originated in Eurasia and were brought to Africa by Portuguese settlers. The first Africans stolen from their homes and brought on slave ships to the Americas actually brought seeds with them, including collard seeds. Collards are a highly nutritious leafy green vegetable that enslaved people adopted in place of the dark leafy greens from their homeland. In that way, collards became an important food of the African diaspora and filled a nutritional gap in enslaved people's diets. Today, more and more people are intentionally reconnecting to collards to celebrate the importance of this food in African and African American history and culinary traditions. Colors are just one of many possible examples of important culinary traditions that a person can connect to. More and more people are finding ways to reconnect to lost family heritage and stolen or separated cultural heritage. Saving and keeping seeds can be a really powerful way to reclaim that family and cultural connection. Now, you've probably all heard of the idea of dwindling diversity within food crops. In the mid 1970s, there was a movement of people who were starting to become aware of the dangers of losing genetic diversity of our food crops. With the introduction of commercial farming, many varieties that were once common were being replaced by hybrid varieties that were thought to perform better, to ship better, and longtime favorites and family heirlooms were dropping out of popularity. One great reason to save seeds is to combat this loss of diversity and to contribute to a stronger food system. Now, you may have seen this graphic before. It aims to show the number of varieties of a few specific crop types, specifically the number of varieties commercially available in 1903 and in 1983. I want to point out a couple of really important things to note about this graphic. First of all, it's showing what is commercially available and then what is available in the USDA seed bank. So this does not account for the seeds stewarded by communities and home gardeners. Also important to note is that 80 years later refers to 1983, which at this point now is already a long time ago. Since 1983, the heirloom seed saving movement has grown and many small heirloom seed companies have started. We're actually doing some research now to see what this chart might look like if we created it today, and I'm pretty excited to flip the script on this narrative. However, regardless of those results, I decided to share this graphic because it points to a really important fact that if we don't continue to save a diverse number of varieties, they won't continue to exist. So saving your own seeds can contribute to a stronger seed and food system, and one that isn't dependent on the whims of a commercial seed trade. Now, speaking of this commercial seed trade, this graphic is also problematic for a couple of reasons. One, because it is outdated already, and the other is because it doesn't take into account small independent seed companies. What it does show, though, is that there's been a really massive consolidation of the world's seed industry in a way that moves from small independently owned seed companies towards larger chemical companies owning and making decisions about the system. So again, there are reasons this doesn't represent where we are as a society because we can easily separate our own food system outside of this or operate outside of this. But the way that we do that is by asking the question, where do your seeds come from? And who do we want to be in charge of our food system? The closer you are to saving your own seeds or knowing who has saved your seeds, the closer you are to having control over your food and seed systems. Of course, not all seeds purchased stem from chemical companies. There are many reputable seed sources, such as Seed Savers Exchange, and many local and regional seed producers. And getting seeds from these companies and organizations is not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a really good thing. I don't grow and save seeds from everything I don't save seeds from everything I grow, and I don't grow everything I eat. But even getting seeds from a reputable seed source, such as Seed Savers Exchange, does have its limitations, and we saw firsthand what some of those limitations were in March of 2020. As everyone here knows, in March of 2020, we were suddenly facing a worldwide pandemic, and people didn't know what was coming. One of the immediate instincts people had was to turn to growing their own food. This chart shows how the seeds shows the seeds ordered that we received versus the seed orders that we shipped out. And you can see that up until early March, that red and blue line matched each other pretty well. And that's what they should do. That's what we always anticipated. And then there was that moment where the whole world panicked. And you can see here we went from a pretty high seed sales of about 3,000 orders a week to well over 7,500 in a week. And at that same moment, we were evaluating our shipping system and making sure staff were safe, et cetera, et cetera. And all of this just represents one small piece of getting seeds to you. There's an entire supply chain that blew wide open and exposed just how many systems we rely on working in order to get seeds to home gardeners. So as I created this presentation, originally I started thinking about the list of things that we as society were assuming would work up until that point when things stopped working. And I made a quick list of what a person needs to order seeds, what a person needs to get seeds if you order it from a seed company versus if you get it from your own backyard. And you can just see how much longer, the one on the from a seed company actually just keeps going past that page. Um, and I think that it's important to think about if you really have one seed. For example, I grow Good Mother Stallard beans every year, and it's my favorite bean. I save it every year. But this year, if I hadn't saved it and I was counting on buying it from a seed company, I wouldn't have had it because it was out for that year. Now, it wasn't out forever. I could have gotten it a year or two later, but again, it wouldn't have been in my control that it was there that year. Which moves me to my last point of why you might want to save seeds. You can start your own tradition. So you don't necessarily have to be connected to a personal or a family or cultural history. This can also be your own story. You can take control of your own food system. You can work within your community if you have one to work within. Talk to your neighbors if you're in a position to talk to your neighbors. And if you grow a watermelon variety for the next 10 years, not only will you have that watermelon to grow and enjoy every year, but that melon that you're growing will become more adapted to your environment. In fact, if I was growing the same watermelon for the next 10 years, if we started with the same seed packet and I grew for 10 years and saved seeds, and you saved seeds and grew it for 10 years and we planted them side by side, you may see that the ones that you've been saving are going to do better in your environment because it's been adapting along with you this whole time. Plants and humans have co-evolved throughout time, and we rely on one another and we become a part of one another's stories. So growing seeds can create community connections, family connections, and connect you to your cultural heritage, whether that's something you've celebrated all your life or something you're ready to reconnect to or connect to for the very first time. So again, welcome back to the idea of seed saving. Whatever your reason for deciding to save seeds, there are ways to connect to the seed saving community. We at Seed Savers Exchange have a number of programs and resources available. And I'm going to go over just a few of those here right now. So this is a short list of our 2024 events. We hope that you will join us for some or all of these. We're going to start having in-person events again this summer. So some of these are in-person events and some of these are virtual events. We'd love to have you in any of them, and you can find more information about them at seedsavers.org/events. Here's a short list of a few of my really favorite tools for seed saving. The first one on the left is the Seed Garden. This book is a great resource if you're looking to learn about specific crops and how to save seeds. This is my go-to resource for that information. The Community Seed Network is a really great program. It's a virtual program, communityseednetwork.org. It includes a place that you can put yourself on the map, and you can also find other people who are saving seeds, who might be listing themselves as mentors. It has contact information. You can connect to other people in that way. And there are also resources like crop by crop guides, how to save seeds from lettuce, how to save seeds from cucumbers, etc. And then on the right, I'm listing the exchange, which is what we call that gardener to gardener seed swap that I talked about in the very beginning, that Kent and Diane started. We still have that going on. It is that book that I showed you. It's also online at exchange.seedsavers.org. And in addition to it being a gardener to gardener seed swap, it is a way that you can access thousands of varieties from the Seed Savers Exchange collection here as well. Once you get into seed saving, or if this is something you're already doing, there are a couple of programs that you can do to dive in even further. Our ADAPT program, these are both community science programs. Our ADAPT program is something you can sign up for each year. If you sign up, you would grow 3 to 4 varieties of the same crop type from our collection and rate them on performance and flavor. And this is another kind of crowdsourced program where if you're growing something in Minnesota, maybe I'm growing the same thing in Iowa, someone else is growing it in Virginia, and we can compare how they do in these different areas. So it helps us learn more about the varieties, assess their popularity, and give us an idea of what would be a successful addition to the catalog as well. The Renew program is for even more experienced seed savers once you are at that level, because we need help regenerating varieties from our collection. When I was talking about people donating seeds to seed savers, that happened in many different ways. And a lot of the seeds that we only have a small number of. We'd like to have enough that we can distribute so that many people can be growing each of these seeds. And one of the ways that we're able to do that is by having people like you help renew these. And so if you're an experienced seed saver and ready to follow parameters about population size, isolation distance, harvest quantities, things like that, this is a really great opportunity to have a real impact on preserving and strengthening the Seed Savers Exchange collections. Some of the crops that we need help with include tomatoes and beans because we simply have too many of them to grow here on the farm, and also things that have a longer growing climate, such as cowpeas and lima beans. We'll often ask people south of us to help us with some of those. And lastly, I want to invite you all to come visit anytime. Like I said, we have 8 miles of hiking trails. Our visitor center is open from March through October. We have in-person events again this year. Our trails and gardens are open. Our grounds are actually open year-round, dawn to dusk. Again, visitor center March through October, and we do give tours to groups of 15 or more weekdays from May through September. Again, please check out the Learn pages on our website and our Learn pages on the Community Seed Network. And I hope to see you here. And I'm also, I welcome any questions that you may have right now. I see the question, where are they located? So Seed Savers Exchange is in Northeast Iowa, just outside of Decorah, Iowa. What are some types of seeds that can be saved without obsessive attention to isolation? So that's a great question. Knowing your seeds is an important part of knowing how to save them, and some are easier than others. One of my favorite, so I guess there's two answers to that. One is depending on what you mean by obsessive attention to isolation, because if you're only growing, for example, one kind of bean in your garden and you don't have any other beans, for over 100 feet, then you can grow those beans and save those seeds, and you don't have to think about isolation. So things that are self-pollinating or cross-pollinating, those are going to, if you know whether it's sorry, let me start again. If you know if it's a self-pollinating or cross-pollinating crop, that's going to answer the question of how much you have to think about isolation. Again, beans are one of the things that I like to recommend to start with, and that is in part because the isolation distance is just 100 feet at max, and you can usually do even less than that. And like a dry bean, the same bean that you would harvest to eat, you just harvest that and you plant some of them the next year. So the example that I used was the Good Mother Stallard bean. That's a bean, it's my favorite bean. I've been growing for about 10 years now. I plant a couple rows of it, I harvest it, I eat a lot of it, and then I plant what I don't eat the next year and grow it again. And it's really quite easy because it's the very same process to save the seeds as it is to grow to eat for a dry bean. Another thing that is pretty simple to save seeds from is lettuce. Again, you want to maybe just choose one kind of lettuce or give it so with lettuce, if you let it grow past the eating stage, you'll probably have seen lettuce bolt in your garden before. If you let that bolt continue to flower, those seeds will form. You can grow 10 different kinds of lettuce, but just only let one kind bolt and go to flower. And then that is the only one that those seeds won't cross because other lettuce aren't flowering at the same time. Um, those are a couple of things. Um, Again, just knowing what will cross with each other. So, for example, there are different kinds of squash that might cross with each other and different kinds that won't. And so for me, I always grow like 4 different kinds of squash, and I save seeds from 1 or 2 that I know won't cross with each other. And so just knowing that, and you can look that information up either in that seed garden or even on the seed packet to know the species that you're working with. Okay, it says some plants say do not save seeds. Will you explain this? Usually from a plant purchased from a greenhouse or big box store. Yeah, so there are a couple of reasons that you might see that. Firstly, when we're talking about the seed saving that we do here at Seed Savers Exchange, it's from open pollinated heirloom seeds. And not hybrid seeds. So it's not technically true that you can't save seeds from hybrid seeds, but if you save a seed from a hybrid plant, it won't necessarily be the same as that parent plant. So if I'm growing the heirloom seed, the German pink tomato, and it doesn't cross with any other tomato, then that seed, if I plant it again the next year, will again be a German pink tomato. So anytime you have an open pollinated heirloom seed, that's a seed that you can save and know that it will be the same next year as long as it hasn't crossed with anything else in your garden. Now, if it actually says do not save seeds on a greenhouse plant, that's probably because it's patent protected. Sometimes when people have, when plant breeders have created a new variety, then they have a patent on it that protects that legally, so that you can't, so that other people can't legally create that for a number of years. Seeds whose ancestors came from some of these like old time seed catalogs, those actually are part of our collection, things that, especially if they're no longer in the seed trade industry or not as easy to find. I think that those are considered by seed savers to be important seeds to save. But if you're talking about something that is some of the bigger seed companies now that are creating these hybrids, then that falls more into that category of that's not going to come true to type. And that's not the kind of seeds that we're working with here at Seed Savers Exchange. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. If not, feel free to ask again there. Okay, Alice, we've been saving the same seed for many years. This year we noticed there are some white beans along with mixed color beans. Would you use these? I love this question. So there are a few things that might have happened here. If you're saving the same seeds year to year and at one point you see something different, the first thing to think of is maybe it crossed with something. And then the next possibility is that maybe there was this dormant gene the whole time and it expressed itself for some reason in this moment. The question of would you use these is completely up to you, and different people will say yes or no for different reasons. If your goal is to have it be the same year after year after year, then maybe you'd eat the ones that are a little bit different and not plant them the next year. But that's not always going to be everyone's goal. Some people might see that as an important piece of the diversity of the genetics of that variety and keep saving that and incorporate that in and say that, for every 100 purple bean, you will get 2 white beans. And that's now part of that description. And you can keep incorporating that. And maybe it will shift. Maybe you'll keep getting more and more white beans, or maybe it'll never happen again. The other thing that some people might do is save those off and kind of create their own little breeding project. I have a friend who has been doing something like that for the past 7 years, and it's pretty fun to see. So as an example, if it was, like purple beans and then a few white beans came out, she would have saved those white beans, planted them 100 feet away. The purple ones keep mostly producing purple. Occasionally, maybe there's another white. The white ones will do purple and white. And she keeps separating them out and saving those white seeds so that after maybe 7 years, now there's this new variety that has been created from the situation of white beans. So completely up to you whether you use something like that, but it can be a pretty fun and exciting project if you wanted to. Store your seeds somewhere cool, dark, and dry. And as far as the packaging, glass is going to probably be the best because there's nothing that's going to escape from it. But admittedly, I use just an ordinary envelope. Sometimes I do have one of those desiccant packets, and that can be recommended, especially if you're in a humid environment. What we do here at Seed Savers, and this isn't going to be necessarily what a home gardener would want or need to do, but we do a seed moisture content test before storing anything long term. And so the way that we do that is take the weight of a seed and then crush the seed and remove the moisture by putting it in an oven for 24 hours, and then take the weight again. And then that way we know the percentage of that weight that was water. And we want to make sure it's within an acceptable range before putting it in the freezer, basically. So something like that is more for long-term storage. I would say as far as being acceptable, I think refrigerated in a Ziploc bag and having a desiccant packet is fine. Think though about if your refrigerator is a humid environment, that probably isn't the best place for it. People also sometimes ask about freezers, and some people say, yeah, freezers are great. Other people are a little wary of it, especially if it's a freezer that fluctuates temperature a lot, because you want it to be a pretty steady environment. But again, if it's a short-term storage situation, it'll probably be just fine. How large is my garden? My personal garden is about 50 by 100 feet. And to be honest, I have a hard time keeping up with it, but I love it. Can you talk more about Seed Savers collaboration with Indigenous groups? Yeah, so the first collaboration, the first formal collaboration with ISKN, I believe was in 2015. And that again was with the leadership of Rowan White, who is part of ISKN and was also our board chair at the time. And so she was kind of a liaison between the Indigenous groups that she was already connected with and Seed Savers Exchange, and that helped us create some really important partnerships there, and that we have since maintained. And so the kind of gist of that was that people within those Indigenous communities looked at lists of seeds that we had in our care here at Seed Savers Exchange and identified some that they believed or thought maybe were their seed ancestors, and identified them, and we provided them with those seeds in different ways. We grew them out here so that we could increase them, make sure they were healthy, and shared them with those Indigenous groups. And we've done different iterations of that throughout the years. This year, our project is an orchard project. And to be honest, I've been less part of that one, so I can't speak to it in great detail. But what I know is that we've identified some apple varieties and have connected to a couple of indigenous groups who want to rematriate some of these apple varieties into their communities. Okay, has the definition of heirloom seeds changed? This is a good question. I think that really different people have different definitions for the phrase heirloom seeds. There is not one standard definition. But the way that we talk about it and define it here is an open pollinated. So again, something that's going to be true to type year to year if you're planting it and it's not crossing, and that it's passed on generation to generation. And there's three different kinds of heirloom seeds that we're working with here. One is a seed that's passed on from family to family, or from person to person within a family. One is within like a community or region, passed on year to year. And one is those old time seed catalogs that I was talking about, where it might have been something that, in the 1900s, early 1900s, was available through seed catalogs, but because of shifts in what's commercially available, is no longer found commercially, and so has been saved, I guess, for lack of a better term, from no longer being available at all by being saved by people or by Seed Savers Exchange. Of course, the word heirloom itself really just has to do with generations sharing something really special with the next generation. Right, good question. So age being a factor for Seed Savers accessions policy, it is a factor. And I think for most of those three, it has to be passed on year to year for 50 years. It has to have a history within the United States for a certain number of years, and I think it's 50. But again, that's not like a standard across the board definition. If another organization is using the phrase heirloom seed, I wouldn't assume that it's the same number of years. But for our accessions policy of what we can accept, if someone's trying to donate a seed to Seed Savers Exchange, we have identified that it needs to be passed on generation to generation for a certain number of years. All right. Well, thank you all. I encourage you all to think about seed saving. Again, if you're interested in learning more, we have lots of resources on our website at seedsavers.org/learn. There's also a lot of resources on communityseednetwork.org and a couple of events I highly recommend. We have, let's see, I'm looking at the dates here. Our virtual seed school starts on September 9th. It's on Mondays for about an hour and a half for September 9th through October 21st. And that can be a nice kind of deep dive starting at the beginning of how to go about starting your seed saving journey.
And with that, we'll just say thank you again. And